Hello, everyone. Today is April 24th, 2017. Today, we're going to endeavor into an article published today by CNBC regarding statements made by Alibaba's CEO, Jack Ma. This follows some themes of a couple of statements by Bill Gates about robots taking jobs and robots falling into the territory of taxable income. So, of course, this was a report released in February of this year. Bill Gates came out talking about robots stealing jobs and therefore qualifying as taxable income. So this is reprehensible in a couple of ways. Obviously, how do you tax a machine? Of course, we're using machines in our daily lives, and they're saving us a great deal of labor and cost, and yet they're not human beings. So I'm not sure how you're going to calculate the type of tax burden that should be carried by these robots. Also, I'm not sure if they will be paying into Social Security, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, and how they would benefit from these contributions, because obviously robots aren't going to collect on Social Security. Furthermore, they hardly qualify as human beings, so how would they ever be subjected to the same statutes that are that expand to human beings? Nonetheless, billionaire Jack Ma came out deriding robots in a way by suggesting that they are going to cause grievous harm to Americans and the world across the next 30 years, and that across that same term, we could experience a robotic CEO. And this may or may not be true over the course of the next 30 years, as obviously there are some qualities about human interactions which are important to the business world. But if in the future we can eliminate the ambiguity of business in a way that communication is carried out by robots in a way that eliminates the costs of doing business, I think this would be something that would be really beneficial to the average consumer. So I'm going to go on and read this CNBC article that was published today, and we'll dissect it, and we can take a look at this through the lens of economics. So the article goes on to say this: Alibaba chairman Jack Ma warned on Monday that society could see decades of pain thanks to disruption caused by the internet and new technologies to different areas of the economy. In a speech at a China Entrepreneur Club event, the billionaire urged governments to bring in an education reform and outline how humans need to work with machines. In the coming 30 years, the world's pain will be much more than happiness, because there are many more problems that we have come across, Ma said in Chinese, speaking about potential job disruptions caused by technology. The Alibaba founder warned that social conflicts could have a huge impact on all walks of life. Ma's company has invested in areas such as cloud computing and artificial intelligence as it expands into new sectors beyond its e-commerce business. Ma said around 15 years ago he gave 200 or 300 speeches warning about the impact of e-commerce and the internet on traditional businesses, but not many people listened as he wasn't well known. The billionaire warned that any business not linked to the internet could suffer in the future. Ma also spoke about the rise of robots and artificial intelligence, or AI, and said that this technology will be needed to process the large amount of data being generated today, something that a human brain cannot do. But machines shouldn't replace humans, what humans can do, said Ma. But instead, the technology community needs to look at making machines do what humans cannot. This would make the machine a human partner rather than an opponent. But he did admit that AI was likely to lead to people living longer and fewer jobs around. And robots could also replace chief executives of companies. 30 years later, the Time magazine cover for the best CEO of the year very likely will be a robot. It remembers better than you, it counts faster than you, and it won't be angry with competitors, Ma said. So this summarizes the or this concludes the article. So obviously he makes a reference to robots replacing humans and replacing chief executives and producing an outcome that might lead to people living longer and fewer jobs around. So this is actually a tremendous boon to the economy, as the inherent propensity of any encumbered market economy is to reduce costs, to reduce labor. So it's all about adding value and encouraging labor-saving devices. So as Ma suggests, if you're not going to contribute in the form of the market economy, which is now have been lifted to the cloud, it's been lifted into the Internet of Things, you're going to fall behind. And this is not a bad thing. It's not an economic bad. This is actually an economic good, that the Internet is widely accessible, and in so being widely accessible, it allows a thorough vetting of goods and services, through reviews and through the actual physical use of these products and use of these services, and through internet forums such as Yelp, which can inform people and educate people on the experiences that the consumers have had with these services. So, as I was saying, as it turns out, the inherent propensity of any unencumbered market economy is to reduce costs. And this largely takes the form of labor-saving devices, the exercise and application of capital to expedite, ease, or enhance the quantity and quality of production. It all stems from value-added enterprise. Jack Ma's Alibaba Group is actively involved in e-commerce, providing consumer-to-consumer, business-to-consumer, and business-to-business sales services through web portals. Ma's Alibaba.com is a prominent shopping search engine, which, through those mentioned portals, much like Amazon, Craigslist, eBay, and other e-commerce services, reduce the time-specific cost of searching for goods. The financial burden of an otherwise more ambiguous market of goods, where prices and reviews may prove more untenable or wildly unreliable, while also working in concert with other services and forums such as YouTube to broadly and conveniently educate the general population of what has proved to be a spectacular spectrum of theatrical and pragmatic subjects. And this is a personal example. Even tutorials and procedures on vehicle maintenance, home repairs, so-called life hacks have made life far simpler and far more affordable for the average person. So when you talk about the Walmarts of the world, those mega supermarkets, the monstrosities of Costco, wholesale enterprise, industries and companies that appear flush with cash, you must remember that these profits were earned through the aggregate expansion of the overall pie of production, through volumes of sales influencing millions of people's lives, and saving the average individual not only the burden of financial payment, but the more toilsome cost of unreliability, the acquisition of knowledge, communication, transportation, and the physical trauma of having to undergo these tasks in lieu of these automative systems. So the end of all economic affairs is to enable income surplus or savings, which can enable surplus time to pursue other things, other activities, arts, leisure, or innovation, the latter of which breeds further capital formation, furthering the cycle of labor-saving devices and the tools available to reduce labor-specific work and thereby the costs imposed on the consumer, all while supporting the advancements of the average standard of living. After all, it is not work that we desire, not the mere toil or exhausting drudgery. It is the produce and production, the output, that is ultimately desired. As it turns out, each of us has an organic propensity, as illustrated by the law of supply and demand, to pursue our own respective variety of perceived advantage. This translates into market competition. And in a market becoming increasingly richer with the skills or know-how, or the accessible tools to acquire know-how, we find that producers will be incentivized to explore cost reduction strategies, to bid for consumers who then, by volume, not exploitation or so-called price gouging, constitute the bulk of sales, producing only marginal profits in a competitive space, which ultimately then enable that aforementioned surplus income or savings, which can be saved, otherwise known as deferred consumption or deferred investment, or immediately consumed or wisely invested into additional projects or ventures, which can further expand the rich pool of incentivized producers. So throughout history, of course, we have plenty of examples of these types of inventions. I think that one of the greatest examples has been the progress experienced in agriculture. Agricultural production continues to progress over the past 50 decades. We see a tremendous change in the amount of farm or agricultural labor required to feed the same amount of people. So just to give you an example, from 1960 to 2010, we see an increase in the capacity of the farmer, and this is due to some really instrumental advancements in technology, from aerators to cultivators, plows, harvesters. And obviously this goes back to the cotton gin that dramatically improved the output of labor in picking cotton and bringing it to the consumer, and then you have the tractor. A lot of these labor-saving devices made it possible for the farmer to dramatically increase the output of his labor. So in 1960, the data show that one farmer was able to feed 25 people. That's a dramatic improvement from the centuries before, where the average farmer could feed 4 people, and it was basically subsistence living. 1970, one farmer to feed 73. 1990, one farmer to feed 129 people. 2000, one farmer to feed 139 people. And the latest data will show that it takes one farmer to now feed 155 people worldwide. Obviously this is enabled by a lot of these automations, a lot of these capital formations that reduce the cost of production. That means time, that means labor, and it put a lot of farmers out of work, and it freed up that labor. So now those farmers weren't required to farm all day, commit their time and their labor to just producing food. They could instead be reallocated to something more effective and far more desirable. This is something that we can compare to a greater analogy in economics. So Milton Friedman, this was many decades ago, he visited China, and during his trip, he went and visited a work site where there were construction workers who were using shovels. So he asked the Chinese representative why they weren't using some massive earth moving equipment instead of the shovels. And the guy basically told him, "You don't understand. This is a works or job creation site. So this is a place where they were hoping to produce jobs." And then Milton Friedman says quite humorously, instead of shovels, why don't you just use your hands? At that point, you can just dramatically increase the amount of employment required to complete the same job. Obviously, if we were to take this example and apply this to the real estate market, we would have far fewer homes today, at least on scale and on the same quality. It wouldn't be tenable for people to afford houses when they would have to pay for far more people to do the same task. So another example is, and it's really quite basic, is traffic. Back in the 1700s and 1800s, all the way through the early 20th century, traffic signaling was conducted by police constables throughout the world, or police officers. So in 1722, for instance, 3 men were tasked with directing traffic on the London Bridge. This was until 1868, when the first non-electric gas-lit traffic lights were installed. This was a precursor to the eventual conventional three-color traffic light produced by police officer William Potts in Detroit, Michigan in 1920. So these officers were tasked with something that today would seem really menial. And today the police officers, instead of tasking 3 police officers with manning a post to facilitate the flow of traffic, we can free up those officers for something that might be more productive. So in that space, they might be able to fight crime, to investigate crime, to instead maybe even vacate the public sector and find work elsewhere. And this is something that if we endorse this type of policy, whereby we want to either directly limit these types of investments, the disproportionate effect is to limit the purchasing power of the lower class and of the average income earner. Of course, the higher income earner can afford to pay the higher premium and the higher cost, but this is something that over the course of human history has had a demonstrable effect on the purchasing power of the average person. And this is what happens when you reduce to zero or near zero the cost of marginal production. And that's what we want to approach. So another good example, and this is one which is close to me as I am a resident of Redwood City, California. And today, DoorDash, which is a popular vendor or service through which restaurants and food vendors will communicate with their consumers. And what it does is it enables the consumer to order delivery. And if you walk around downtown Redwood City, you may see that there are some transportation vehicles, some unmanned vehicles that are wandering about the streets, and these are some of the latest in technology that DoorDash and potentially Uber Eats will use in the future. And this will mean that we won't have to rely on the individual or another person to be available for delivery of food, and instead we can just at any time of day, particularly when these places are open, we can rely on these machines to be available. And the maintenance costs for a machine may be lower than the maintenance cost for a human being. There aren't as many liabilities involved in hiring a machine as there are in hiring a human being. You don't have to worry about health expenses. You don't have to worry about payroll expenses. And you don't have to worry about the machine showing up on time for work. You don't have to worry about the interfacing between the human being and the machine. There's a lot of cost reduction involved there. And in that competitive market, you can pass those price reductions and those savings down to the consumers. And it not only comes in the form of reliability or price reduction, and it comes in the form of that aforementioned reliability factor. So and when we talk about the automation of driving, and then obviously that's something that's become pertinent as Tesla has expanded its influence. It's going to be a tremendous boon to many people. If it comes talking about the transportation industry, obviously human drivers are limited to a certain amount of hours that they can drive. They have to get a certain amount of rest, and the same goes for aircraft. Aircraft, when we're talking about unmanned aircraft, that reduces the number of casualties. When it comes to GPS navigation, you've put some people out of work in terms of maps, traditional, conventional, outdated maps. When you get a map, it's outdated almost immediately. It doesn't update. Whereas the GPS navigation systems, if you use Waze or any other Google Maps or something else, which is a competitor, it's generously improved the lot of the average person. So it's widely accessible. So in the end, The summary and the conclusion here is that these types of inventions uh, will encourage labor saving and will free up the labor to pursue other more effective and efficient means of production. And a lot of these are not yet known. So if these types of attitudes were encouraged and endorsed and sponsored politically during the 18th century and 19th century, the American Revolution or the American Industrial Revolution may have never taken off. A lot of this equipment may have never been built to reduce the cost of living. And obviously, there's a lot of foresight that one would require in order to understand the effect of these types of attitudes. During times when there weren't freezers or refrigerators, you had milkmen, you had icemen who would deliver ice, and a lot of these costs have been eliminated due to cheaper and more widely accessible equipment. So let's think about the opportunity cost before we jump to the conclusion that these costs, the immediate costs, are vilifiable. There are going to be some people who are put out of work at the onset. These people will become re-educated, or they'll be encouraged to be re-educated, and they will learn more valuable skills that the market warrants. So anyway, this is John Rock, and this is just a review of Jack Ma's disposition on labor-saving devices, and he may not see it that way, but we need to be careful about the way that we assess these types of advancements, because the end result of labor, or the end game of the economy, is not to produce labor, but to produce production.